John Cranley from the city of Cincinnati, and we're going to hear from the mayor about a number of wonderful, successful initiatives that they've had. We have Jason Stanford, who is the head of the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance, a regional transportation advocacy group right in the DC metro area of Northern Virginia. And then we have with us Youssef Robb with Accelerator for America, which is a national group that provides valuable help to regions and enabling them to collaborate on initiatives to help fund and get significant infrastructure projects going. So we're very excited, and I'm going to jump right into it. Jeff, if you could describe some key successful practices of Accelerator in engaging and informing key stakeholders in the coalition practices of Accelerator.
Start as early as possible. Okay, this is not, I hate to inject politics into it, but ultimately these things are, and you cannot win if you use the general Labor Day to November sprint. You need to start as early as possible, engaging the people of your region with your plan, not necessarily with a campaign or political agenda. And that goes all the way back to the plan. What you don't want to do is what people do often, which is to say, hey, the Transit Authority developed this, is get your stakeholders involved in the development of the plan. That is a laborious process. It's a time-consuming process. But at the end of the day, two things are going to happen. Number one is you're going to end up with more projects than you know what to do with. But inevitably, those are going to align with what the engineers and the planners think is best. Because of the sheer numbers and because the people within communities know what their communities need. And so you're going to end up at campaign time with a plan that everyone has ownership over. Okay, so you need to start way at the beginning. The second lesson is everyone in. Too often these things start with the transit community or the mobility community or the advocates. And those people are important. They have enthusiasm, they have energy, and they have expertise. But let's face it, the most likely voter is the most likely driver. So how do you start engaging and communicating with the mass population you need to pass your plan from the outset? Again, you don't want to show up in September or October before November 1st Tuesday election with a brand new thing that a driver is going to be very confused about. And the third thing is go national. Even the smaller initiatives are many, many billions of dollars. And so at the same time you engage your local stakeholders, and I'll just pick on two, your local offices of your engineering firms, your local labor unions, you should engage the nationals. Again, even the smallest initiatives are dealing with many billions of dollars. And in terms of fundraising, in terms of raising the national profile, you not only need to engage with your local stakeholders, but you need to engage with the national offices that represent your national stakeholders. They will get involved with a $500 million a year thing, $1 billion a year thing, a $10 billion thing over 10 years. It's big enough for them. And a small campaign check to them is worth a heck of a lot in most media markets we're talking
about. Thank you, Youssef. That's great information. I'm going to switch to Jason now and then come back to the mayor after Jason. And hopefully we'll have it ready by then. Jason, I want to ask you about funding and spending for regional transportation collaboration in your Northern Virginia region. How is that managed, and who has the tax and spend budget authority? And what is the structure of that in your region?
Sure, Tony. Just making sure everybody can hear me okay.
Yes, you're good.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to speak with you all about transportation. This is an issue that I care about and that the Alliance has been engaged on in Northern Virginia for more than 30 years. And we've really been, in a lot of ways, kind of leading the way on the transportation, education, and advocacy side. And while I do, just to go to your points too in just a second, but some of those points that Youssef just raised, I wholeheartedly agree about, taking that long-term approach. So this can't just be a campaign that you start right before an election comes up. And that's why the Alliance, we've always sort of viewed ourselves as the ongoing campaign for transportation in the region. Even more so, I used to talk a little bit about saying, hey, taking the transportation plan and saying, this is what you should focus on. I think the Alliance has done that, for a number of years, and we have had some success, but it has to be, as you said, something that is a long-term, view and approach. So if you look at what's happening in Northern Virginia, to go to your point about what are the regional bodies that we have, and so we have so many, and I think it's very similar to what you laid out here for your region. There's a variety of transportation funding sources in the greater Washington region, and we're always trying to balance how the region pays for transportation. We have the Northern Virginia Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, which is our regional MPO and plans for the region. While they have no real funding authority, your project has to be included in their plan in order to get federal funding. Then we have the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which is a regional body, and it's a separate MPO and has long-range planning capability, as well as collects regional funds in Northern Virginia from sales tax and grantors tax. That's the sale of homes. And then we have the authority also is required to spend 70% of its funds on regional projects that expand the capacity of our transportation network. These projects are scored using a number of factors, but the most important one is congestion relief relative to cost. And I think it goes to one of the things that Yusuf pointed out too is, this plan is developed in a way that, the average driver can sit there and say, hey, is this project going to reduce congestion for me or reduce the time that I spend stuck in my vehicle? Yes, let's do it. Furthermore, we're part of WMATA, which manages our regional rail and bus networks, including Metro. They get dedicated funding from DC, Maryland, Virginia, the federal government. They have an annual budget of $4 billion, but only $800 million of that comes from rider fees. And in fact, peak rail ridership is, one of the main drivers of their ridership funding as well. So, the COVID impacts are going to play a longer term role in that for them and for all commuter rail really going into the future. But that's not all. We have the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and the Virginia Railway Express, which has dedicated regional gas tax funding and is made up of localities. It also has funding from I-66 inside the Beltway toll revenue and 395, I-95 toll revenue that they dole out every year. There's PRTC and OmniRide, which jointly funds VRE and has similar funding sources to MVTC and runs local bus service in Prince William. And then there's the Commonwealth, which is mostly focused on sales tax, gas tax, vehicle sales tax. And if that wasn't enough, we have the billions of dollars of public-private partnership projects and investments, including the express lanes on our major highways. And did I mention the Dulles Toll Road, which funds billions of dollars in bonds to build the new Silver Line Metro extension? So no matter how much money you have, funding transportation is always going to be an issue. But I think that one of the keys to Northern Virginia's transportation success has been the focus on creating dedicated regional transportation dollars. In addition to having a broad bipartisan support, it has helped unify Northern Virginia in many ways. And once we have that funding, it's much easier to fight over how to spend it. And every local and state elected official is invested in keeping that money in Northern Virginia and investing it in the region. So I do think that that's a key driver to getting to the transportation improvements that you want to see for your region.
Thank you, Jason. I understand Mayor Cranley is with us on the audio, so I'm going to turn back to you, Mr. Mayor. Your region includes parts of 3 states, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. I think we have 2 here, North and South Carolina, which is more than enough, but having 3 has to be even more challenging. What are some examples of your successful strategies and tactics for collaborating across state lines on transportation infrastructure, planning, advocacy, funding, in construction.
Well, hey, sorry, can you guys hear me now? Sorry about the technical difficulties. This world of COVID sucks for all of us, as we all know. And I'm going to answer that, but I do want to make some general comments just in case, which also gets to the original question I didn't get a chance to answer because of the technical issues, and also just in case my technical issues resurface. I want to kind of hit some basic big picture items that I think you guys should all hear from our experience. First, as I said at the beginning, the accelerator was incredibly helpful to us in understanding what would and wouldn't pass regionally for a sales tax for more infrastructure and public transit. But I think the most important thing to express is that the people who are in public service, like myself and the leadership of the business community, in general are aligned that mass public transit should be expanded, and it's good for people and it's good for economic growth. It's been our experience that that is not what people care about. And to cut to the chase, what passed our levy, which we passed in the middle of a pandemic after 6 previous failed attempts to pass a sales tax in Hamilton County. And by the way, it's just one county, and it's the most liberal county in the region by far, and yet it's still not that liberal. And 6 previous attempts had failed to pass a public mass transit levy, was that we dedicated a third of the money to fixing bridges and potholes and just general repair of existing road conditions. And had we not done that, we would have lost badly. Maybe Charlotte's different and maybe it's far more liberal than Cincinnati, but frankly, I doubt it. And so it was our goal to expand public transit. It was our goal to invest in new modes of public transit. But we would have failed if that had been the focus of the campaign. And so, in fact, our detractors, and we only won by a couple hundred votes, said it was just a bus tax and just for public transit. But we won the campaign by focusing on potholes and fixing bridges. And the fact of the matter is that 90% of people drive or take the bus and they see potholes and they see bridges collapsing. And I think it's a crime that the federal government and the state government don't give us back our fair share of taxes to fix roads and bridges. But that doesn't change the fact that that's true. And so, as your previous speaker said, a local regional tax for infrastructure is vital if you want your region to compete. And the one thing I object to in the beginning of this presentation is the prediction by 2030 that North Carolina will be more populated than Ohio. I appreciate your ambition, but we are also ambitious and we intend to prevent that from happening by growing faster than we have. And growing faster than we have is in part because we have been able to convince our residents to invest in transit and transportation infrastructure. And my strong advice, in case I get cut off again, or if I have to leave or technical difficulties reemerge, is to twin all efforts with, traditional infrastructure of roads and bridges and potholes, because that's a winning message. It's a bipartisan message. And now to answer the actual question I was asked on this turn, we have 3 states and we have very little cooperation among the 3 states. We are required under federal law to have an MPO, which does great work. Our OKI is, they are living saints trying to organize 3 different states, 12 different counties with very different political climates. And it's very tough. It's very, very tough. And, they, of course, receive the federal dollars that we do get through the MPO. Through all 3 states, and we do have a voting mechanism by which we prioritize those. So we're forced to, and I'm glad, and OKI has done a great job in make our MPO of getting us to cooperate as best we can. But let me be very clear that we are the most liberal county by far in the tri-state region, and we passed our transit levy by a couple hundred votes. Any other effort to include those suburban collar counties would have been, crushed. if we had tried to bring them in or force them in. And so it really is a coalition of the winning or of the willing, and we are going to expand public transit, which we do believe will repopulate and add economic growth in the core county, Hamilton County, the city of Cincinnati County, to the detriment of those other counties, although they will also get the free rider benefit of having a more vibrant urban core.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Jason, I'd like to ask you that similar question for your region, which also includes parts of 3 states, Virginia, Maryland, well, and Washington, D.C., which is technically not a state, but it's got the boundaries. What are some examples of your successful strategies and tactics for collaborating across those lines on transportation infrastructure, in particular transit?
Sure. And, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of different regional transportation bodies in Northern Virginia. And, frankly, the Alliance has been at the forefront of either helping create or enhance collaboration between many of these organizations. The Alliance has always been viewed as the ongoing transportation campaign for Northern Virginia, and goes back to what Yusuf said very much at the beginning. I would recommend having an organization that can be a full-time dedicated transportation focused organization, making sure that, not to let any opportunity slip through the cracks. When you deal with multiple jurisdictions, it's important to be ready when the stars align, because you never know when you're going to have support from elected officials in all of your relevant jurisdictions together at once. And you can only be ready to capitalize on that advantage if you're out in the community, educating people, talking to people, so that when you have that opportunity to make that shift and get people moving in the right direction for a project, you can take advantage of it. You can't just be something you go, oh, I hear there's a vote coming up in 3 or 4 weeks, let's mobilize people. So I think it's important to have that kind of ongoing conversation for transportation. Furthermore, when I started for the Alliance, what I heard most often was just how important the Alliance was in bringing together the regional business community. We organized 20 plus regional business and civic organizations throughout Northern Virginia on transportation. And they all look to us in some ways as kind of their outsourced, transportation expertise. We've been a strong, consistent voice that's been critical in driving key transportation improvements for Northern Virginia. In direct contrast, the chambers and business community in Maryland, has been a lot more disjointed. The phrase I hear most often is Stockholm syndrome. They're afraid to speak up and stand on any issue with local and state elected officials. And this contrast could not be more clear in how Virginia versus Maryland is handling, the building of a regional express lanes network. The business community's strong support of these projects has resulted in express lanes on I-66, I-495, and I-395. These projects provide tremendous multimodal benefits for our region, including opportunities to invest in transit. The I-66 outside the Beltway resulted in a number of major transit investments, creating dedicated and reliable bus lanes. It's basically in a lot of ways used as a BRT system and letting both HOV vehicles and transit vehicles use those lanes for free. And also we've taken some of the money from those projects and invested more in bike and pedestrian infrastructure as well. And the Northern Virginia business community has really been key to ensuring that message got to local and state elected leaders. In contrast, despite creating some of the same benefits in Maryland, local and state leaders often seem kind of unaware of that because the business community has just been very quiet. And finally, I think this all kind of feeds to my last point, that someone has to be a leader. Northern Virginia, has played that role in our region. And I can give you 2 really good examples of that. One is the American Legion Bridge, which has ultimately, it is a huge part of the regional express lanes network, but it's 80% in Maryland. In theory, Maryland should be paying for 80% of the bridge, but Virginia made a deal with Maryland to essentially take in 50% of the toll revenue and pay for 50% of the bridge, all the way up into a few miles into Maryland. And you can look at another big example, similar, would be the Long Bridge project, in which Virginia, even though the bridge would be over the Potomac River in DC, but all DC is paid for is the environmental study. In contrast, Virginia has worked to secure $1 billion in federal funding in support of that project, but is also committing hundreds of millions of Virginia dollars for a project not located in Virginia to help push that forward and push DC, Maryland, and other local regional stakeholders into coming in to fund that important project. So at the end of the day, whether it's the business community, local government, someone has to be a leader. We can't just all sit back and point fingers and say, well, this isn't getting done because of Maryland, this isn't getting done because of Virginia or DC. We have to make sure that someone has to take that stand and take some bold action.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, and I agree that the importance of stepping up and leading is always critical. Youssef, I have a question for you, and it's about messaging. In connection with building a coalition, especially these kinds of coalitions where you've got multiple states or multiple counties, multiple other entities. How do you develop a successful message that's inclusive and appeals to stakeholders from these different kinds of geographic areas?
Well, first I'll start with kind of what you're trying to get to, right? And Jason hit it on the head earlier. He said, what's in it for me? And Mayor Cranley talked about bridges and potholes, problems that everyone can see. At the end of the day, a transit plan is going to result in a map. It's going to result in a lot of blueprints, a lot of schematics, and they're going to be sprinkled all across the region. But, most, if not every transit initiative doesn't have the budget to micro-target. You have to find the common denominator, that common problem that people are trying to find a solution to across the region. Okay. Now, how do you get there? You start early. Part of that is the listening process with all your stakeholders. Remember, I said everyone in. That is an anecdotal, maybe even a qualitative focus group type process that can inform planning. But you have to do real polling and you have to do it early. Again, I think a lot of campaigns maybe start over the summer doing some polling. They do some tracking between September and November, and they call it a day. I worked on Measure M in Los Angeles, which was the $120 billion transportation infrastructure measure that passed in 2016. We started doing polling 2 and 3 years early. And that is the only reason we won, I believe, because we didn't just know it was about traffic. Great, that is a wonderful starting point. But we had richness to understand, and I'm just going to tell you exactly what our frame was. If you build this, they will get out of my way. And the only way we got inside people's head into that frame was through years and many thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of polling. So as Jason said, look, whether it's an alliance or the government transit entity, you don't need to ask people 2 years out or 1 year out what the horse race is necessarily. You did need to find out about how they feel, what they think, what is their daily life like. You have to live where people are. I'll tell you one eye-opening thing we found during Measure M. The Interstate 10 in Los Angeles runs from the East San Gabriel Valley all the way to the ocean. We were talking to people in the East San Gabriel Valley, about 30 miles inland. And we were trying to talk to them about the improvements that would happen in their local neighborhoods. Oh, they're doing this flyover and they'll replace the roads and all these things. Everyone was talking about in the focus group, they were asking us about what's going on 30 miles away on the coast. Because we realized they live along I-10 because that's where they commute. And that's where the bulk of their everyday problem was. And so again, you have to find that universal concern of people. You have to put yourself in their shoes. People are mobile. Maybe they live in one area, but grandpa lives over there and they take the kids there. They work over here. They go to the ball game over here. They're concerned about the region. What is that regional message you got to find? And it really takes a lot of in-depth research, and you got to start that early. And again, one of the things the accelerator does when there is no vehicle to do early research, we do help organizers try to do that because it's so critical to get those nuances. You can't just say it's going to solve traffic. Yeah, you said earlier the term ease congestion. We use that term in Measure M. We probably put 6 figures behind identifying the term ease congestion versus solve traffic versus fix traffic versus end traffic. Okay, those nuances are extremely important. So start early, find that universal thing that knits everyone together, because even a bridge, unless everyone's driving through it, you don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, well, who has more projects? Which project is being sequenced first? Right? The question is what's in it for me. And if it's about the projects, it's always going to be inequitable, right? You're not building an equal amount of stations in every neighborhood because that wouldn't make any sense. So you got to find the universal problem and use this as the universal solution that's going to make people's lives better everywhere in the region.
Thank you, Youssef. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but I would like to jump back to Mayor Cranley. Mr. Mayor, can you describe some specific success stories in your region for significant transit and infrastructure projects, and include the economic opportunity impacts of those projects?
Thank you. And this will have to be my last comment today. So look, as I said earlier, we had tried as a community 6 previous times to pass a public transit levy and had failed, going back to the 1970s. And so passing that, we think, is a game changer so that we can, in fact, stay more populated than North Carolina as we promote more economic growth. So that accomplishment is one of the proudest moments legislatively of my career in public service, which is almost 20 years. And it was a very, very hard fought, long effort. And we did, with the help, to Youssef's point, we wanted to go to the ballot in 2018. And with the help of the accelerator, we pulled it, and we realized if we couldn't pair it with roads and potholes and bridges that we would lose. And so we slowed down. And in fact, our transit authority that put the levy on the ballot did not have the legal authority to add potholes and bridges. And so we worked in a bipartisan fashion with Republicans in Ohio and the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, to change state law to explicitly give the transit authority the ability to do what we needed it to do in order to pass it. And that wasn't easy. It slowed us down 2 years, but it made all the difference. And so I agree with all the notions about working with chambers and in a bipartisan fashion with the Coalition of the Willing. I would also say, just as a personal preference of my own, on a project that I've put a lot of capital into politically, is converting old railways into bike and hike trails in the city of Cincinnati. Like Charlotte, and we're a 19th century city. We've been around for a long time. And so we have lots of railroads that go through the heart of a highly dense urban population, some of which are abandoned. And getting those from railroads and then building hike and bike trails has been hugely successful and also hugely expensive. And we have been able to achieve federal dollars for those projects. And we had a champion who, I'm a Democrat proudly, and U.S. Senator from Ohio. One of them is Rob Portman, who happens to be a constituent of mine, who's a Republican. And he and I are both advocates for these bike trails. And that has made a gigantic difference in us getting federal funds for that project in particular.
Thank you. That's very instructive. And I have to note, as a side note, that that Rob Portman's wonderful spouse is a North Carolina native. Couldn't let that go by.
Well, I'd also point out that she's also a great friend, and I'd like to point out secretly that she is a Democrat. So, just saying.
Interesting.
Could I add 30 seconds to something that Mayor Cranley just said, and it ties back to messaging? He really led this effort, okay? And Jason said earlier, it needs a leader. It is worth researching whether you need a human being, an actual human being, to be the face of the campaign, right? Sometimes these sort of initiatives are a thing. Vote for Measure M, it's a thing. But if you can find a leader that can embody that, to be the literal face of that, then you have someone in which people are putting their trust, as opposed to an abstract notion. Some jurisdictions that work, some it doesn't. In Mayor Cranley's case, he, as the mayor of Cincinnati, despite all of those different jurisdictions, he is the most visible elected official. He gets on the Cincinnati TV station. Same in LA. We have 88 cities. LA city proper is only 40% of the population, but only one mayor gets on TV, and that's the mayor of LA. And in Mayor Garcetti in LA and in Mayor Cranley's case, they happen to be popular. And so again, finding if a leader will work in your jurisdiction is very important, because at the end of the day, people want to trust each other, not necessarily a measure X.
Very good point. And have you seen, Youssef, that people get at that through testing and polling and focus groups and tools like that?
Yes, because, the frank reality is sometimes the most visible politician is not very popular. So you got to test that. You got to figure out, what the feelings are toward that person. Because again, it's trust me, trust me with $1 billion is a pretty big deal. So you want the right person. You want to move Mayor Cranley to North Carolina or to Texas or wherever the campaigns are, and just move them around.
Well, since you're on the mic, Youssef, talk about economic opportunity as a theme around regional collaboration for transit infrastructure, and how those investments help advance economic opportunity. For example, the large return on investment, job creation, et cetera.
Yeah, and this is really why Accelerated for America is involved in transportation infrastructure. We're actually an economic opportunity organization. We like to say we're involved in building community wealth. But there's no greater ROI, we believe, than infrastructure investment. The jobs it creates are good jobs. I know that's a phrase you hear a lot during election season, as we are right now, but they are. In many parts of the country, they're union jobs with benefit, retirement, healthcare, et cetera. In other parts of the country, they're just well-paying jobs with all those sorts of benefits too, regardless of union membership. When you have a levy like this, they're usually 30 years, 40 years. In some cases, they're no sunset. So that means these aren't just one-off jobs. We're building a bridge. Okay, that lasts as long as the bridge lasts. But if there's a 30-year revenue stream, that's 30 years of not just jobs, those are careers. That's something that families can plan against. They can pay for the college, pay the mortgage, save for retirement. That is the middle-class stability that's been hollowed out of our economy in recent years. And certainly right now during the pandemic, we need those kind of jobs more than ever. US DOT says, highway jobs for every billion spent is 22,000 direct jobs. Then you get the indirect ROI. We're more competitive and more attractive to businesses and jobs when the commutes are shorter, when there's the infrastructure to facilitate commerce, all of those things. We were talking to CEOs in LA, again, talking about the breadth of our county, 30 miles. And there was a company on the west side, a tech company, and they said, when we came to LA, we assumed we would benefit from, let's just say, the engineering degrees in a 40-mile radius, because in other parts of the country, that's what they say for their work pool. Well, in LA, once they got there, because the traffic was so bad, their talent pool was basically restricted to 5 or 10 miles, right? Those are the sorts of things that businesses need to move to your community and thrive, right? So you have that larger economic growth. And again, think about ports and airports and all of those things. And then look, let's just face it, you have tax revenues, right? Even though this is a tax, when you build a stronger economy, that helps support the fundamental bottom line. But honestly, at its core, it's about 30 and 40-year jobs. Those jobs are rare right now in the United States. And it's not just something that families can plan against. If you have a 30-year levy, or in LA's case, we went no sunset, you can leverage against that. You can borrow against that. You can do P3s against that. You can plan that. The longer it is, the more tools you can unlock to really look at a long-term horizon for your region. So the ROI, it's not a triple bottom line, it's a quadruple, quintuple, whatever you want to call it. Look, again, you clean up the air in your community, you're saving money and you're making people more productive. The list goes on and on.
Thank you, Youssef. Jason, we're getting crunched on our time. I'm gonna give you about 60 seconds to quickly tell us about some of your key success stories, in particular, the 98-mile metro system and the Virginia Railway Express commuter service.
Sure. No, thank you, Tony. I'll try to be brief. There was, one of the projects that you and I spoke about previously, and one that sort of has been, has had a lot of legs recently in our region, is the Long Bridge. And it's a commuter rail bridge that connects DC to Virginia. But it's owned by CSX. It's the only, it's the only rail bridge for 40 miles. And it's over 100 years old. And so you see pictures of this thing, it looks like it could fall into the Potomac any day. And so, we've been focused on, and Virginia has made a big priority of this, is being able to to build another bridge parallel to it that's owned by the Commonwealth, and then creating tracks further south to help expand the Virginia Railway Express system. And really, I think we talked a little about messaging earlier. As I said, we talked a lot about how we need to, replace this old bridge. And you can really kind of see just visually why there needs to be another option. We also talked about regional and federal significance, pointing to the fact that Amtrak and other commuter rail can't run more trains without this bridge. And they ultimately leveraged that into about $1 billion investment from the federal government. But we also had legislators from as far south as Virginia Beach talking about the importance for freight rail for building this new bridge. So trying to look outside the box on that, the importance of economic development, especially in an area outside of the Beltway in Prince William County, an area where people has no metro service, but does have Virginia Railway Express commuter rail, being able to expand that service as a result of building this bridge. Obviously Amazon helped, and Amazon is going to be well served by the building of this bridge. But it also had universal support amongst business community and transit advocates. We created, using creative funding sources, showing that Maryland commuters would benefit tremendously from this and trying to pull them in, as well as looking at I-66 inside the Beltway to back bonds for the project. And from the Alliance perspective, we went and spoke to 60 plus groups in Northern Virginia, community groups last year, talking about our priorities, and made sure to emphasize this, and helped us build our list of people to advocate and mobilize when we needed to, and help shift the message around these. So, I think even if you look at within our region, transit ridership's actually gone down about 17%. The population's gone up 13%. But businesses, even if people don't use it, businesses want to be within 1 mile of transit. That's where people want to live. That's where people want to work. And so, again, it's an important economic development tool. And so we've emphasized that with great success. So look forward to the next round, Tony. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to now go into our lightning round. Like a lot of good shows, we're going to end on the lightning round. So I'm going to pose the same question to each of you. And if the mayor is still with us, I know he said he had to go, so I'm not clear if he's still here, but if he is, he can answer as well. So it's about the number one key takeaways that you would leave our audience with today. What are the absolute key critical lessons learned, in connection with collaborating and building these coalitions? And they can be lessons about what has worked or what has not worked, either way. But if I'm tomorrow, I'm thinking, what were Jason and Yusef's and Mayor Cranley's each their key things? That's what I'm getting at. So Yusef, I'll start with you, and then maybe my tech people can let me know if the mayor is still with us or not. Okay, Yusef, you're up.
Yeah, the quick takeaways are you can't start engagement or research soon enough. Whether, no matter how half-baked or not unbaked the idea is, start the research and start the engagement. In terms of messaging, and from the very outset, just think about not the plan necessarily, but what is the universal outcome that people want? Where are people right now and where they're going to be in their lives? And that's the third thing. We talked about jobs and we talked about congestion, all these things, but at the end of the day, there's an emotional component to all of this that we can't forget. What am I getting for it? Jason, what's in it for me? It's a better life. Okay. So how do we connect this work with people's everyday lives and their feelings about themselves and their ability to live out their American dream, for lack of a better term, at home, in the workplace, and everything else? So don't forget people. Yes, this is about trains and planes and automobiles. At the end of the day, it's about people. So how do we connect this to them and their lives?
Thanks, Youssef. All right, Jason.
I would just piggyback on what Youssef just said in terms of, again, taking the long-term approach. Transportation projects, especially big ones, billion-dollar projects, take a long time to plan, design, fund, support, and come to reality. The Long Bridge project I just talked about, before COVID, it was planned to be built by 2030. And now after COVID, we're looking at 2032 to 2034. So it's a long road ahead. And so taking that long-term view and having, a consistent and, strong voice for transportation all the way throughout that process, not taking any of these things for granted, and making sure that you can continue, as you said, take that long view of the campaign the same way these projects take the long view, and continue to both be a vocal advocate and leader for these types of projects.
Thanks, Jason. And I understand that Mayor Cranley has dropped off, and so I'm going to take moderator license and put in my 2 cents. And I think you guys are so on point. And I would add that we have to look at the critical importance of building and maintaining relationships as we construct this coalition, so that we can get to working together, as you were talking about. And I want to echo your earlier point about leadership and not having a leadership vacuum, and who, whether it's an individual person or a group that is going to be the face of this collaboration, both in the short term and the long term. So that concludes our lightning round. And I want to thank you guys for the great information, and also thank the mayor and his team. And so we're going to wrap it up now. I think we're just about right on schedule. And so, Janet, I am going to now throw it back over to you and thank our panel for your wonderful insights.
Yes, Tony, thank you. Wow. Special thanks to Cincinnati Mayor Cranley, to Youssef, and to Jason, and Tony, of course, to you, for a really frank and energizing conversation. Some of the highlights for me were, again, start as early as possible, engaging people in the plan, not just the campaign, the importance of coalitions for both public and business. That's good for economic growth. That we can win through a long-term approach. You can gain regional and bipartisan approach through both the traditional and transformational look. And then maybe my favorite one was, get grounded in what the universal problem is and find a universal solution that we can all coalesce on. So thank you again, y'all. It was a fantastic discussion, and I hope everyone out there found that to be valuable. As we wrap, I want to make a plug for our 4th installment. It will take place on October 29th, again from 11 a.m. to noon. And that session is really around catching the wave and positioning the Charlotte region on the leading edge of infrastructure. We're going to talk about how all of this is interconnected. We will highlight both the interconnectivity of our transportation infrastructure along with internet connectivity. And we'll talk about the wave of the future and learn about 5G and how this truly can bridge urban with rural and how this all works together in terms of smart city technology. A few of our speakers include Secretary Eric Boyette with the North Carolina Department of Transportation and Representative Jason Sain. We're very excited about having them speak and join us, and we look forward to sharing more about those details as they continue to unfold. So that's it. I think we've got just a minute and a half left, but thank you everyone for spending time with us. We hope you found this to be time worth spending, and we will see you very soon. Be safe out there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.